I think it's kind of fun and funny, and I go out and do what I can do. And it's a liberation from pain, from emotional pain. And, a lot of people commit suicide because they think they have a self that isn't good enough.
Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hi, David, and welcome to all of our listeners around the world, throughout the galaxy. This is the Feeling Good podcast, episode 407. And today we have two very special guests. Of course, our beloved Matt May is joining us. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Rhonda. Hey, David.
And we also are so excited that Fabrice Nye, the founder of the initiator of the Feeling Good podcast, is joining us to add his
Hello, everyone.
Philosophical brilliance. Hi, Fabrice. There are many events in people's lives, and one event in my life that changed my life for the better, both professionally and personally, that changed my life in profound, wonderful, and magical ways. And that's the first time I took David's 4-day intensive, which I took about 11 years ago. And David has been putting on those intensives, for probably 20 years, but he had to stop during COVID. So you haven't put one on since 2019. And we're really excited to announce that August 8th through August 11th, David, along with Jill Levitt, who will be his co-teacher, will be putting on another 4-day intensive, which is an introduction and an in-depth look at what team therapy is all about. And so if you've ever listened to any of the personal work that's been done on this podcast, especially the last personal work that we did with Chris, and we did one recently with Cody, but any time that you've listened to personal work, I've done personal work with David and Matt as the therapists, and you thought, gee, I wish I could do that. Gosh, they must be really magical. You too can learn how to be the kind of team therapist that can do the kind of personal work that you hear on this podcast. And in order to, and all you have to do is attend this 4-day intensive. And you can go to www.cbtintensive.com and find out all the details, how much it costs, how to register, where local hotels are that are close by, and take advantage of this incredible opportunity to learn about team therapy from the master and the person who founded and created it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And it'll be again at the South San Francisco Conference Center. And if you want to come live in person, which will be pretty awesome, I urge you to check it out fast, because we're going to be limited to 120 people for in person. If you want to come online, we can take as many as want to attend online. But if you want to come to the in-person event, move fast, because by the time this podcast comes out, there will probably be very few seats still available for the in-person, but check it out. And the other thing is, not only will we teach you how to do exactly what we do when you hear us doing these single 2-hour sessions that bring people from A to Z in a single session, but you'll also have a chance to do your own personal work. And if you've done your own personal work and experienced your own enlightenment, you'll have much more to bring to the clients or patients who you work with.
Right. Well, David, do you want to introduce this subject? Today's the second in the talk on the practical philosophy.
Yeah, and last week we talked about the free will problem, and today we're going to talk about another classic problem in philosophy, and one that a lot of people are still talking about these days, and that's this perplexing problem of, do we have a self? And there's a lot of strong ideas about that, but most people feel like we have a self because, we can feel like I have a self. This is me and this is myself, so I must have a self. But when you try to define the self and figure out what it is, you may end up going around in a lot of circles and getting very, very confused and frustrated. And I would say that I had a chapter in my book, Feeling Great, about the self. And I think the title of the chapter was, Do you have a self or do you need a self? Join the Grateful Dead. And the theme of the chapter was that, talk about whether or not we have a self is kind of nonsensical. I wasn't arguing that we do have a self or that we don't have a self, but that the very question is really doesn't have any practical meaning. But I was shocked when people who read it found it extremely threatening and pleaded with me to remove it from the book, including someone as illustrious as our beloved Professor Mark Noble, who he just thought it was very disturbing to think that somehow that we don't have a self, or that the questions about the self are somewhat nonsensical. And so I took that chapter out. But ever since then, I get emails from people, maybe once a month, saying, when are you going to do a podcast on the self? Or when are you going to write that chapter? We want to find out about that chapter. So today we're going to talk about the self, and I'm just so thrilled to have you, Fabrice, because whenever we've talked about the self, you're one of the few people who seems to have a really cool angle on the topic, and so we're just so glad you could come back and join us for this special introduction to philosophy and to video podcasting. So here we are, folks. You can see us. This is me. And myself. This is myself.
That's really interesting. So does your self include your body? Like, is there your body self and your other parts of yourself? Like, are you going to first define what the self is? Or is that what this whole podcast is going to be about?
So why can we start out with you, Fabrice, and let you get the ball rolling on this discussion of the self, and how do you think about the self, and why should anyone care? And isn't it obvious, Fabrice, that we feel like we have a self? Doesn't that mean we have a self?
So I agree with you that there's a sense of self. We feel like a self. For a lot of people, if you're to ask, where is it? They might sort of locate it somewhere behind the eyes or in the center of the head, or that would not be uncommon. It may be cultural. Some other cultures may locate it in a different part of the body. And when I speak with people about this, including my clients, I talk about it like it's a thing, like we're talking about an actual object that has a reality to it and is almost tangible. But my conviction is that there's no such thing. I like to look at it as what is it that is being pointed to when we use our name? When we say David, what does that point to? Does that point to an actual David? Is there a David? What is your experience, David? Is there one?
Is there a David?
Is there a David? Yes.
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of ways to answer that. I'll hold off for the moment, but I'll let Matt answer that question.
I liked the beginning, David, when you said, "This is myself," and you kind of motion to your body. And Rhonda asked the question, is your body yourself? And my intuition is that it isn't. That if someone were to lose, say, their arms or their legs, they wouldn't say that I lost a part of myself, or I have less of a self. They lost a part of their body is more accurate.
Yeah, yeah, right. That's right. We say I had a wart removed. We don't say I had a wart self removed.
Right.
A little self tag. We call it a skin tag. So we have a little consensus going here so far. Good. Carry on.
Can I ask you another question about the self?
Yeah.
Is this
no?
Is the self our consciousness or our awareness?
Well, I will leave that to smarter people.
Fabrice, is our self our consciousness?
Well, so I would say this is a matter of definition.
Yes, right.
The thing is, the self is a very nebulous notion. And so when I say myself and when you say myself, we may not have the same notion exactly. In fact, we probably don't. And I know that David is really big on how we use nouns. And a noun, we tend to think, just like when you say the table, the self, we think of those things are identical. They're pointing to something tangible, real, and that can be manipulated, and something that has existence. But can we point to the existence of a self? Let's say it's consciousness.
I love everything you're saying, Fabrice.
Let's assume that, okay, we'll define the self as consciousness. Okay. Well, consciousness is not a thing, it's a process. The process of perceiving, knowing,
remembering.
Thinking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like that answer.
And eating a delicious dish of ice cream and enjoying it.
Yeah. Or at least the enjoying part would be consciousness.
Yeah.
The wanting of it would be consciousness.
Right.
And that changes from moment to moment. My consciousness in 10 seconds may be, totally opposite of what it is now. So does that mean I have a totally opposite self? So then it's not a thing, it's not something stable that we can point to, it's just happenings.
Well, is consciousness awareness? Like I'm aware of my thoughts, I'm aware of my feelings, I'm aware that I'm eating this ice cream. And is that awareness part of our self and our consciousness?
Well, you're using two words that get defined in terms of one another, awareness and consciousness. So maybe you want to define what you mean by either.
Well, let's say someone is in a coma. Do they have a self? They don't have awareness, but they're still living and breathing. Are they aware of do they have thoughts? Are they aware of their feelings when they're fed? Are they aware of the taste of it?
Or do I lose if I fall asleep, do I lose myself? And does it come back when I wake up?
That's a question.
Yeah.
And
if you
that
say
happened to me this morning.
If you say consciousness is the self, then yes.
Well, and then is there a duality? There's consciousness and non-consciousness, and there's nothing else? Like there's a self and a non-self? Or is there a third, or is there another?
There are seven of them.
There's seven? So it's not a duality, it's I don't know how to say so.
Heptality.
Yeah. I'll add my spin to it. I love what everybody's saying here. Or you want to give your spin on this thing, Matt?
I've never been able to find myself. I've looked near and far, and it seems to keep being one step away from me wherever I look.
Yeah. I couldn't find mine when I woke up, and then I looked in I have a dresser drawer filled with socks, and it was in there.
Oh, yeah, I sometimes have that happen too.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's close to the sole, and the sock is close to the sole of the shoe.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
Shut
What
up,
is a
David.
soul?
Yeah, that's right. Um,
It's where
the
the rubber meets the road.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think that the way you explained it was really beautiful, Fabrice, and it really reflects my own thinking. I like to represent the thinking of Wittgenstein because he was my hero, and I owe my career to him really, because if it wasn't for Wittgenstein, I would be, I majored in philosophy of science at Amherst, and I probably would have gone on to philosophy graduate school to try to solve all of these problems. And then I read his philosophical investigations and couldn't figure out what the hell he was talking about. And then 6 months later, it kind of hit me like lightning. And then I saw some very simple, obvious things I hadn't seen before. I was a slow learner, but once I got it, it really had a huge impact on me. But the way he would look at this is that the meaning of a word is just the way we use it in the English language. And I have conversations with our cat, Sweetie Pie, but they're very primitive conversations. But she wants something, and she'll meow and look at me with her loving eyes and kind of point at the thing that she wants, and then I get it for her. It's usually some cat candy. I give her 3 pieces in the morning, and that's all she can get because she's on a diet. But she wants her cat candy, so she tells me, Daddy, it's time for my morning cat candy. And and so she's not making metaphysical statements when she says meow in this sweet way. She's just saying, I'd really like some of that cat candy, and she's not trying to talk about metaphysical cat candy or whatever. She wants some candy, and that's all that's going on there. That's how the language is functioning. And if you just look a word up in the dictionary, you can see all the ways it functions in everyday conversation. So if you say to a child, "But behave yourself," you're not making a metaphysical statement or some mystical statement. You're saying you're misbehaving, and I want you to stop doing that. And then when you say, can you come to Kai's wedding, and you might say, oh yes, I'm going to go to Kai's wedding. And I can say, are you going to go by yourself, or are you going to bring someone along with you? And those are just ways that we're using the word self. But what occurred to Wittgenstein was that Plato and Aristotle got us all off on the wrong foot, because they started thinking that there was this Platonic reality and that words are imperfect representations of these things that exist in some kind of supernatural Platonic reality. So you mentioned table, and Plato would have thought there's something as a perfect table existing somewhere. And nouns are trying to be representations of this otherworldly thing. But all nouns don't refer, as you point out, to things that could exist or not exist. They're just words that we use in a variety of ways for practical purposes and language. And once you see that this "do we have a self," we've taken a word out of its context where it lives in our language, the ways we use that word in our language. And we're imagining in some metaphysical realm where we have to start defining it and figuring out what it is. And in that realm, it has no meaning. So the word self has all the meanings of all the ways we use it, when we're talking to each other in our daily activities, our daily life. But this thinking of the self as some thing, as you said it so clearly, Fabrice, that could exist or not exist, and what are its characteristics, and where does it exist, and is it our consciousness, or is it in my right earlobe? It was in my right earlobe for a while. But if you squeeze it, you can get it out of there, because it can itch sometimes. That you get a self in your right earlobe, and that's just intended to be humorous. But you all have deadpan faces, so I'm being pretty ridiculous. But it's a letting go of these certain kinds of philosophical questions. But so that's kind of my spin on it. When I saw that, it was such a relief to not be plagued anymore by these problems of philosophy. But they do come up, and maybe I can turn to Matt or Fabrice or Rhonda. See, our patients think they have a self, and so they think, I'm not worthwhile. I'm not, myself isn't good enough. And I can remember once, you remember, Matt, in the car, when I was supervising you, and you were saying that you were trying to become a better and better person every day with a very sincere face. And I said, I hope you get over that pretty soon. But it was kind of a joke. But the joke is that it's as if you think you have a self that is competing with other selves to see whose has the most special self, the most worthwhile self. And our activities can be more or less worthwhile, but the idea that we have a self that can be more or less worthwhile is kind of meaningless. And part of cognitive therapy or team therapy is not getting people who feel less worthwhile to feel more worthwhile, because now you've just gone out of the frying pan into the fire, but to dispense with the idea that you have a self that can be judged or measured. We can have our activities judged or measured. You can say, David, you're talking too much, and you'd probably be right. But you're not judging a self. You're just saying, David, shut up, okay? I can do that. And that's okay. Then maybe we'll make for a better dialogue. But it's not thinking that you have a self. And for me, that was also a great liberation to realize that an awful lot of me is the things that I do are just way below average. I walk kind of with a cane that I have to rest on because of my low back pain. And I used to be able to run, with the pack, but now I can barely get a half a mile, but that's okay, because it's not a reflection on myself, because I don't. To me, that has no meaning, and I'm not ashamed of the fact that I'm kind of elderly and slow. I think it's kind of fun and funny, and I go out and do what I can do. And it's a liberation from pain, from emotional pain. And, a lot of people commit suicide because they think they have a self that isn't good enough. And they feel hopeless that they could ever become good enough. And they see other people who they say, oh, she's so pretty, or he's so good looking, or this person has accomplished so much, and how could I ever be worthwhile, and things like that. And it's really a practical cause of depression, and contributes greatly to anxiety and shame and other things as well.
David, you were talking earlier about using those words in context. So here's an example of context. I'm sure you've had numerous clients who said to you, I hate myself.
Right,
So that sounds quite familiar.
Yeah.
And when you heard that, I'm sure you didn't say, that doesn't mean anything. I think you probably understood what they meant. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that they have a relentless critical voice telling them you're not good enough, you're bad, and they're listening to that voice. I'm not proposing philosophy as one of the 200 techniques that I use for helping people who are feeling depressed. I don't see it functioning in that particular way, if that's what you were driving at, and I think it's a really good point. But that's the philosophical world that the person is living in.
Well, so what I'm trying to point out is that we understand people, even if we have this understanding that there isn't such a thing as a self. When people talk to us, referring to it, we understand what they mean. So there's an inner understanding of the language, even though the nouns per se don't point to anything tangible.
Yeah, they hear it as describing something that's factually true. I hate myself because I'm no good. I hear it as bullying, the kind of thing that an older child would do to a younger child in the schoolyard in order to hurt somebody. But I don't think they necessarily recognize it as cruel bullying.
In fact, in that sentence, there's an interesting thing, which is, I hate myself. There's an I, and there's a self.
Right.
So who is hating whom?
Yeah.
Who's the I?
The inner voice you have that's trying to be mean to yourself.
Right. And so it's trying to be mean to nobody in particular.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something about the body, which we touched upon earlier. So there are bodies. We can't deny that. So we could say that, there's a number of physical units walking around, and we can discuss what the boundaries of those units are. They may be somewhat nebulous. Where does your skin end and where does the air begin? Or when you're touching somebody, where does the touching happen? But nonetheless, we have fairly good description of this as a physical entity. And it so happens that whatever we are conscious of seems to be moving around with the body. Like right now, I'm looking at redwoods outside my window, and that's my perspective. But if I ask Matt what he's looking at outside his window, it would be something different. So there's a points of consciousness are centered around those bodies.
I'm actually looking at the same trees as you, Fabrice.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll pick somebody else then. Bad example.
You'll have to choose a different self.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yourself and myself, Matt, are just merged as one.
As always. Well, I think we were a little deadpanned earlier, David, because what you said was so brilliant and so succinct and cuts to the thinking process that causes our suffering.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you realize that our thoughts aren't real in the same way as the universe or our bodies or something like that, you have access to a way of being at peace, of letting go of those thoughts, being less attached to them. Is that part of the utility, or how is it useful to realize that language is only meaningful or words are only meaningful in context? Like if you ask,
well, it's
do you want a treat?
In the context of philosophy, it's kind of just a straightforward thing. It solves the problems of philosophy on a purely kind of logical level. But for me personally, I spent a lot of time in my younger years being perfectionistic and thinking that I had to be working all the time, and if something isn't really great, or if there's a failure, feeling threatened by that because myself was involved in my thinking. And it was kind of like a revelation when I used to do externalization of voices in my own head, and think like like, I mean, a simple example for me would be giving a workshop and then somebody getting a bad rating from someone, which is very common because I'm kind of outspoken and kind of subconsciously say things intended to piss people off. And then when they get pissed off, it's kind of troublesome. But it used to threaten me to feel like I was failing, like there's some self that's failing. And that was and then when I realized, well, why don't you just pinpoint exactly what you did that was an error? Maybe you criticized somebody or challenged them in an insensitive way so they got hurt and upset. And maybe that's not a good thing to do in workshops, or maybe in life in general, as a matter of fact. But that's a specific behavior that I can correct or improve. And but I'm not improving myself. I might be improving my ability to teach mental health professionals, for example.
So it might not help to try to beat up on yourself?
Yeah, exactly, and just be really kindly and think, oh yeah, that's a good thing for me to learn. So focus on what I'm going to do and what I'm going to learn, rather than some judgment of myself. And it was a great relief to me. And the first times I thought of it, I thought about it a lot and to make sure it was really true. But it was kind of a relief from suffering, which of course is what we're in the business of doing. But I think you've had a lot of thoughts, Matt, about the self and believing that. Or of course, we've talked a lot about free will in our emails, but weren't you expressing some pretty strong thoughts about the self, or you're believing we do have a self, or we don't have a self, or I can't remember now what your thinking is.
Yeah, I'm of the persuasion that there is a common illusion that we're subject to. I think that's in line with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that it's possible to try to define the self in various different ways, and they're all false. That every possible definition is incorrect.
They're nonsensical, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can be disproven.
Disproven or just nonsense? I mean, you can define it in any way. How would you disprove one of them?
Sometimes just through inquiry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Using the Socratic method. Like if you say the self is the part of you that doesn't change from moment to moment, then
right. For example,
then it certainly can't be influenced by anything in the world, and it can't influence anything in the world. So it's not very worthwhile.
Yeah. So I guess that's a metaphor that's useful sometimes. Is to like you never cross the same river twice.
Yeah. Right.
Which it could come down to like at which moment did I have a self? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Do
one other thing I want.
You were talking about your cat, so I kind of am wondering: do dogs and cats and other animals have a self?
They do, but humans don't. That's the point we're trying to make. It's the same thing. I mean, it depends on who you want to ask that question to, but I don't use self in my relationship with cats or dogs. I love cats and dogs and love to hang out with them. I say to someone I meet, oh, you have such a beautiful dog. But then I don't add to that, oh, and he has a nice self too. Like, I don't know what that means. I already said it was a beautiful dog. It's just how you want to use language. And the only reason we're, involved in what might be viewed as a silly philosophical conversation or debate or dialogue or whatever is because there are tremendous implications on feelings, and that the idea that you have a self. Well, Fabrice, one of your most brilliant statements, I think you were quoting Buddha or some Buddhist thing, was no self, no problem. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, I forget whose quote that is, but yes. Exactly. No self, no problem. Because who is having the problem? If there's no self, there's nobody to have a problem.
Yeah, yeah. Now you may have a problem, but it would be a problem with your behavior or some event or a financial problem or something. But it isn't a problem of yourself. There's no
Right.
such thing as a
And
problem of yourself.
it wouldn't be I having a problem. It would be just problem. And then problem is also a judgment, to use that term.
Well, that's true
So
too.
it's
Yeah,
just be situation.
yeah. It might be an opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
When I screw up with the patient, that's an opportunity to learn and deepen my relationship with the patient or with a colleague like yourself or Matt or Rhonda. One
David,
other, yeah,
I like it when you ask the question, like, what would be different if I had a self
yeah,
or
right,
didn't have a self? Like, what would the predictions be that we
yeah,
could experiment with and test? Could we talk about that a little bit? I'm curious what Fabrice has to say about that too.
good. Go ahead, Fab.
I don't know, in terms of prediction, um, I I like the way you talked about defining the self, Matt, and there's different ways to do it, and all of these can be disproven. Um, but that's as long as we define it as a thing. But if we define it as a process, then why not? Something that is ever changing, that follows a very lawful cause and effect. We could say, well, that process is the self. You know, the flowing of a river can be defined. It changes all the time, and then will never be twice the same, but it can be talked about, and it has a meaning that is useful.
And human is more like a river than a piece of concrete, although we've known some who are similar to a piece of concrete too.
We
The
will not name names.
I want to mention one other reason to bring in this concept is because if you look in the DSM-5 or any of the diagnostic and statistical manuals of so-called mental disorders, it lists 400 or 500, 600 mental disorders with elaborate criteria, and I wanted to comment on that because you see when you say you don't have you're not shyness isn't your problem, you have a mental disorder called social anxiety disorder, then it sounds like it's something that you have, like a defect of some kind, and that can potentially create and does create a tremendous amount of shame. And there are true mental disorders. There are, at least 3 of them, and maybe, then another 5 or 6 that are in the maybe category. But the thing, in medicine, we have tissue pathology. So if you're saying someone has pneumonia, you can see it on an X-ray. You can get a sample and grow the bacteria, identify the bacteria, and it's a clear abnormality. And so the philosophy isn't so much an issue in medicine, although there are still some philosophical issues in medicine, but not nearly so much as in psychology and psychiatry, where and when I did my research in the Stanford Hospital for my easy diagnostic system, I was viewing that as symptom cluster diagnoses. I'm not diagnosing mental disorders. I'm diagnosing kinds of problems that people have and how severe they are, so I can have a scale for shyness, and person can take that in any situation and have their shyness, their anxiety can be measured on a scale from 0 to 100, and then we can work with them and improve those parameters. But I don't think of it as social anxiety disorder. I think that's very misleading, or avoidant personality disorder, as if these were mental defects of some kind. Now, schizophrenia is a mental defect. It's a mental disorder. And there's some kind of tissue abnormality there that hasn't been identified yet, and we hope it will be. And the same with bipolar 1. And the reason I, at least, am comfortable calling those true mental disorders is because they're not a part of a normal human experience. The shyness is on a bell-shaped curve, just like most emotions are like that. And some people are more anxious in social situations and other are less. But what the DSM does, it says, let's take the top 15% of shy people and then we'll call them having a mental disorder. And to me, that's a motivated thing, because that makes the doctor the psychiatrist feel like a medical doctor. So you don't have to talk to this person and learn how to treat social anxiety, which is one of the most treatable of all, emotional problems that people have. But you can just prescribe drugs, and then you can get $200-300 for a 10-minute drug evaluation session and roll in tremendous amounts of income. And so I think it's a thinking error deep in in the whole mental health system. But it is motivated, because then you can feel superior to the person and feel like you have expertise, and they view the doctor as an expert who knows that I have this mental disorder. There's some benefits of it too. You can get insurance coverage for your sessions, and you may be comforted to know that there's a mental disorder and there's a treatment for it. But I think that most of what's in the DSM is not radically different from Alice in Wonderland, because there's all these arbitrary criteria to kind of make up mental disorders, and I think that's the same kind of thinking error. And it is stunning to me how so many of my colleagues, and it's why I kind of don't fit in well, when I'm in an academic system, and I stay off to the edge and out of people's way, because my thinking is so radically and totally different from colleagues who seem perfectly comfortable to live in a world where they think they're diagnosing these mental disorders and treating them with medications and so-called doing the right thing. I'm probably not explaining myself very clearly, so I need
Well, I
some
have a
sort of
question
person.
for you, David. So,
Yeah.
I do have my reservations about the DSM, but are you saying that mental disorders are only physiologically based?
Do I think that they're all physiologically based? You mean like someone who's a whiz at mathematics? I think that's physiologically based. Is that the same question?
Yes, I'm trying to understand. You said there's only, 3 or maybe 6 actual mental disorders. So does that mean that the only real ones are based on,
Well, I didn't say
wiki?
they weren't real problems. They're real problems. They're not real mental disorders.
Right. And
And
so,
my criterion is, are things distributed on a bell-shaped curve, or are things qualitatively different? For example, I cannot cause auditory hallucinations, which is one of the cardinal symptoms of schizophrenia. So to me, that's why it's a mental disorder, because it's a experience that's outside of the realm of what a normal, typical person can experience. It's a pretty humble definition that I'm using. Or bipolar 1, someone in a manic state, becoming totally psychotic out of the blue, and not even having insight as to how off that is. And that's got to be some kind of disordered wiring in the brain, or some kind of membrane transport, or something that's clearly not normal. But when a deer in the forest sees a wolf or a coyote and panics and runs, that is all physiologic, but that's healthy, normal physiology.
so essentially, mental disorders are not on the bell curve, but everything else is.
Well, I'm not saying that everything in the universe is on a bell-shaped
No,
curve, and the
everything
curves
else
may
that's
not
in the
be totally
DSM.
bell-shaped. They might be skewed or whatever. But that's the criterion that I'm using, yes. Like I can identify with anxiety and depression and worthlessness, but I can't grasp how someone with schizophrenia is thinking.
One definition might be that a mental disorder might be something that might respond to medication or have a biological signature of some sort that you could look at a gene and say, oh, that gene is likely to produce, a person who has schizophrenia. Whereas if you're treating a thought, you're not going to find something under the microscope that you can look at.
Yeah, yeah, and the day will come when we'll know the cause of schizophrenia, and it might not be far off, but who knows? Things are developing so fast these days, and bipolar 1 as well, and hopefully that will lead to better treatments. Alzheimer's disease too, it's not on the bell-shaped curve. It's due to damaged brain tissue. In that case, we know what the damage looks like. And they are learning, and there are some new techniques for treating that to get rid of those plaques in the brain using some kind of impact thing that they could. I saw a great program on 60 Minutes on it recently, but yes, that's and so I'm not saying that people with severe shyness don't need help. They have problem that impairs their life and their capacity to find love and to find friends and to make a family. And I've had at least five kinds of severe social anxiety myself. But when you tell a person you have a mental disorder, I'm not sure that's productive, because it puts the person in an inferior, damaged position, and it sounds like the doctor has secret knowledge that the patient doesn't have, but the doctor doesn't have secret knowledge. Because
and it medicalizes the problem as if there's something that can be physically changed versus something that needs to be addressed mentally.
Yes, although you can certainly physically change anxiety with benzodiazepines, but that doesn't mean they're mental disorders. Just like, you can take an aspirin for a headache, but that doesn't mean that a headache is due to an aspirin deficiency. But anyway,
Can I get back to the question of self?
Yeah.
Because as I'm listening to the three of you talking, I'm wondering, why does this matter? Like, why does answering this question matter to you, David? Or you, Fabrice?
Well, to me it matters because the belief that you have a self, to me, is really inherent in all of depression. It's hard to imagine a depressed person who isn't convinced they have a self that isn't good enough, and it causes profound suffering and shame. And in addition, I think that this kind of nounism thinking is a kind of, I would say it's a mental disorder of the American Psychiatric Association. It's like they're believing in entities that don't actually exist, and I don't think it helps our field to reduce people to a series of diagnoses that some expert is going to have to fix with pills or psychotherapy or whatever. I think viewing emotional problems as emotional problems that can be measured precisely, they all fluctuate. We can measure those fluctuations and develop high-speed techniques for helping them. Like, for example, I just analyzed data this morning from the app and the Feeling Great app, and the data indicated. I just had a portion of data from about a couple hundred people, and all 7 emotions went down by roughly 50 to 55%. And then I said, how long did this take? And it's because I had the timestamp, so I calculated the time, and the median time was 1 hour. And you know, when you think of psychotherapy outcome studies, you know, saying we got 44% reduction in depression in 9 months, 55% reduction in 1 hour is pretty fantastic. But we're not trying to treat mental disorders. We're trying to show people how to make your negative feelings improve rapidly. So I think it's a much more effective model. You know, the whole, when I was a psychiatric resident, we didn't ever measure anything. We just thought people had these mental disorders, and we'd be talking to them indefinitely. And I had almost none of them ever getting better.
Well, to answer your question, Rhonda, I think that David was making a parallel between, you know, talking about the self as an entity and talking about a disorder as an entity.
Right.
So then
Thank you.
you become a thing that has a thing, and this is like cast in stone. And
Yes.
it's pretty discouraging to look at it that way. Whereas if you see this as a you know, ever changing relationship, then there's a lot more hope in it.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. I love that, Fabrice, and that there are tools that we can use to help you change the way you think and feel. But we're not trying to, you know, cure you of some mental disorder. And if you have mental disorder like schizophrenia, we can still work with you to help how you feel, help how you function, and pray and that scientists will find the solution to that horrible, tragic disease. Well, I'm feeling a little low. I feel like I've been putting everybody to sleep here. I've appreciated everyone's comments, however.
No, not at all. I don't feel slightly sleepy. You know, you're making really good points, and that's an important reason we're having this discussion. Why are we worried? Why are we thinking about it? Why are we worried about, do we have a self? And the both of you talked about that, you know, the idea about having a self creates depression, or someone who is depressed is thinking about how their self isn't good enough. And, you know, without thinking about the self, when we can talk about, like you said, Fabrice, the ever-changing relationship, then there's hope instead of despair.
Yeah, right.
If I had a recommendation to make to anyone is anytime they start a sentence with the word I, to put that I in double quotes or an asterisk, because it's a notion to be held lightly. It's just a way of communicating something, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. What's your thinking, Matt?
I might add one. I love what both of you are saying, all of you are saying, and I might add one thing, which is that we can also think we have a very special self. We can imagine that we have a better self, and those are also very dangerous, perhaps even more dangerous kinds of thoughts.
Yeah.
And so it's also useful to realize that we don't need to feel proud or superior. We can feel grateful instead.
I love what you're saying, Matt. Can I just comment on that one? Yes, the positive distortions, and thinking, oh man, I'm special. And we sometimes hear people on television saying things like that, and we see the world splitting into warring factions, saying that the other party, that other political party or that other ethnic group, they're inferior and I'm superior. And that's also one of the horrible consequences of thinking we have selves. And then, Hitler sold that to the German people. They were delighted with killing the Jews and the gypsies and people with mental illnesses. And humans have that capacity to kill, to exploit, to hurt others, and to enjoy that process. And that's, again, another problem with this idea that we've got a self. And we say, oh man, I've got such a special effing self. look at all the money I have, or look at how talented I am, or look at this, or look at I'm white, or whatever. And let's get rid of these other selves. They're vermin. They're dirty people from Central America invading our lands, and you get to thinking like that. And it causes murder. It causes death. Not only suicide, causes homicide. I hope I'm not being too dramatic. But yes, that's another perversion, that results from this belief that some people have selves and some selves are better than others. And you lose your humility. And that's one of the reasons I like hanging out with all of you guys, and girls and ladies and women.
Whatever word you're going to use to define myself.
And our whole community, and the team community, I think there is a lot of humility in our colleagues, something that we all love and value so much, and vulnerability.
Well, Fabrice, I know we only have a few minutes left of your time. Do you want to say anything in closing today?
Well, I'd like to quote one of my favorite teachers, if I can wax a little bit spiritual here. And I love listening to Ramdas, formerly known as Richard Alpert. And he used to say that when we're born, we're not born with a self, we're just born. And then due to family and societal pressures, we go into what he calls somebody training.
Oh, wow.
Then we start becoming somebody. And, our parents really impressed that. And then we have to become somebody special.
Yeah, wow.
And the whole spiritual endeavor is about undoing that training and finding that place of no self. So that's what I
finding the place of yourself, or the place of no self.
The place of no self.
Oh yeah, right. Right. The places of no self.
That's right. The places of no self, exactly. That's where peace happens.
Yeah. I love that. Oh, you're such a great teacher, Fabrice, and you put a lot of thought into. Yeah, you put a lot of thought into these things, and it really shows. Well, you want to finish this up, Matt or Rhonda?
I don't.
I'd love to hear from Rhonda.
I mean, I just, I have absolutely nothing to add. It was really interesting listening to the three of you wax philosophical, and I like the closing that you just made, Fabrice, and any other additions to from you, Matt, are totally welcome.
Well, perhaps a segue, because sometimes people think that their self is the thing that could have free will, and maybe in our next conversation we can talk about how that's also an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, although our next conversation is going to happen before this one.
Oh, which is very confusing. Now I'm very confused.
David, is there anything you want to add in our closing?
For me, all I can remember is jogging home from the train station in Bryn Mawr when we were living in Philadelphia. I've probably said this before, but I was thinking about self-esteem, and then I remember exactly where I was, and my self-esteem fell off, and I got rid of it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm running a little faster now. And then a few more steps, I lost myself. And I've never missed it, and it was so much easier to jog after that.
You took the weight off.
To carry.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you being here, and
thank you.
It was joyful.
It was really nice to connect with you all.